Chapter 1. Once was Apollo, now a rat in the labyrinth. Send help, and cronuts. No, I refuse to share this part of my story. It was the lowest, most humiliating, most awful week in my 4,000 plus years of life. Tragedy, disaster, heartbreak. I will not tell you about it. Why are you still here? Go away. But alas, I suppose I have no choice. Doubtless, Zeus expects me to tell you the story as part of my punishment. It's not enough that he turned me, the once divine Apollo, into a mortal teenager with acne, flab, and the alias Lester Papadopoulos. It's not enough that he sent me on a dangerous quest to liberate 5 great ancient oracles from a trio of evil Roman emperors. It's not even enough that he enslaved me, his formerly favourite son, to a pushy 12-year-old demigod named Meg. On top of all that, Zeus wants me to record my shame for posterity. Very well, but I have warned you, in these pages, only suffering awaits. Where to begin? With Grover and Meg, of course. For 2 days we had travelled the labyrinth, across pits of darkness and around lakes of poison, through dilapidated shopping malls with only discount Halloween stores and questionable Chinese food buffets. The labyrinth could be a bewildering place, like a web of capillaries beneath the skin of the mortal world. It connected basements, sewers and forgotten tunnels around the globe, with no regard to the rules of time and space. One might enter the labyrinth through a manhole in Rome, walk 10 feet, open a door, and find oneself at a training camp for clowns in Buffalo, Minnesota. Please don't ask, it was traumatic. I would have preferred to avoid the labyrinth altogether. Sadly, the prophecy we'd received in Indiana had been quite specific. Through mazes dark to lands of scorching death. Fun! The cloven guide alone the way does know. Except that our cloven guide, the satyr Grover Underwood, did not seem to know the way. You're lost, I said, for the 40th time. Am not, he protested. He trotted along in his baggy jeans and green, tie-dyed t-shirt, his goat hooves wobbling in his specially modified New Balance 520s. A red rasta cap covered his curly hair. Why he thought this disguise helped him better pass for human, I couldn't say. The bumps of his horns were clearly visible beneath the hat. His shoes popped off his hooves several times a day, and I was getting tired of being his sneaker retriever. He stopped at a T in the corridor. In either direction, rough-hewn stone walls marched into darkness. Grover tugged his wispy goatee. Well? Meg asked. Grover flinched. Like me, he had quickly come to fear Meg's displeasure. Not that Meg McCaffrey looked terrifying. She was small for her age, with traffic light-coloured clothes, green dress, yellow leggings, red high tops, all torn and dirty thanks to our many crawls through narrow tunnels. Cobwebs streaked her dark pageboy haircut. The lenses of her cat-eye glasses were so grimy I couldn't imagine how she could see. In all, she looked like a kindergartner who had just survived a vicious playground brawl for possession of a tyre swing. Grover pointed to the tunnel on the right. I'm pretty sure Palm Springs is that way. Pretty sure? Meg asked. Like last time, when we walked into a bathroom and surprised a cyclops on the toilet. That wasn't my fault, Grover protested. Besides, this direction smells right, like cacti. Meg sniffed the air. I don't smell cacti. Meg, I said, the satyr is supposed to be our guide. We don't have much choice but to trust him. Grover huffed. Thanks for the vote of confidence. Your daily reminder, I didn't ask to be magically summoned halfway across the country and wake up in a rooftop tomato patch in Indianapolis. Brave words, but he kept his eyes on the twin rings around Meg's middle fingers, perhaps worried she might summon her golden scimitars and slice him into rotisserie-style cabrito. Ever since learning that Meg was a daughter of Demeter, the goddess of growing things, Grover Underwood had acted more intimidated by her than by me, a former Olympian deity. Life was not fair. Meg wiped her nose. Fine, I just didn't think we'd be wandering around down here for 2 days. The new moon is in. 3 more days, I said, cutting her off. We know. Perhaps I was too brusque, but I didn't need a reminder about the other part of the prophecy. While we travelled south to find the next oracle, our friend Leo Valdez was desperately flying his bronze dragon towards Camp Jupiter, the Roman demigod training ground in Northern California, hoping to warn them about the fire, death and disaster that supposedly faced them at the new moon. I tried to soften my tone. We have to assume Leo and the Romans can handle whatever's coming in the north. We have our own task. And plenty of our own fires, Grover sighed. Meaning what? Meg asked. As he had for the last 2 days, Grover remained evasive. Best not to talk about it. Here. He glanced around nervously as if the walls might have ears, which was a distinct possibility. The labyrinth was a living structure. Judging from the smells that emanated from some of the corridors, I was fairly sure it had a lower intestine at least. Grover scratched his ribs. I'll try to get us there fast, guys, he promised. But the labyrinth has a mind of its own. Last time I was here, with Percy." His expression turned wistful, as it often did when he referred to his old adventures with his best friend, Percy Jackson. I couldn't blame him. Percy was a handy demigod to have around. Unfortunately, he was not as easy to summon from a tomato patch as our satyr guide had been. I placed my hand on Grover's shoulder. "We know you're doing your best. Let's keep going. And while you're sniffing for cacti, if you could keep your nostrils open for breakfast, perhaps coffee and lemon maple cronuts, that would be great." We followed our guide down the right-hand tunnel. Soon the passage narrowed and tapered, forcing us to crouch and waddle in single file. I stayed in the middle, the safest place to be. You may not find that brave, but Grover was a Lord of the Wild, a member of the Satyr's ruling council of Cloven Elders. Allegedly, he had great powers, though I hadn't seen him use any yet. As for Meg, she could not only dual-wield golden scimitars, but also do amazing things with packets of gardening seeds, which she'd stocked up on in Indianapolis. I, on the other hand, had grown weaker and more defenceless by the day. Since our battle with the Emperor Commodus, whom I'd blinded with a burst of divine light, I had not been able to summon even the smallest bit of former godly power. My fingers had grown sluggish on the fretboard of my combat ukulele. My archery skills had deteriorated. I'd even missed a shot when I fired at that Cyclops on the toilet. I'm not sure which of us had been more embarrassed. At the same time, the waking visions that sometimes paralysed me had become more frequent and more intense. I hadn't shared my concerns with my friends. Not yet. I wanted to believe my powers were simply recharging. Our trials in Indianapolis had nearly destroyed me after all. But there was another possibility. I had fallen from Olympus and crash-landed in a Manhattan dumpster in January. It was now March. That meant I had been human for about 2 months. It was possible that the longer I stayed mortal, the weaker I would become, and the harder it would be to get back to my divine state. Had it been that way the last 2 times Zeus exiled me to Earth? I couldn't remember. On some days, I couldn't even remember the taste of ambrosia, or the names of my sun-chariot horses, or the face of my twin sister, Artemis. Normally, I would have said that was a blessing, not remembering my sister's face, but I missed her terribly. Don't you dare tell her I said that. We crept along the corridor, the magical arrow of Dodona buzzing in my quiver like a silenced phone, as if asking to be taken out and consulted. I tried to ignore it. The last few times I'd asked the arrow for advice, it had been unhelpful. Worse, it had been unhelpful in Shakespearean English, with more these, thous, and ye's, and verilies than I could stomach. I'd never liked the 90s, by which I mean the 1590s. Perhaps I would confer with the arrow when we made it to Palm Springs. If we made it to Palm Springs. Grover stopped at another tee. He sniffed to the right, then the left. His nose quivered like a rabbit that had just smelled a dog. Suddenly he yelled, "Back!" and threw himself into reverse. The corridor was so narrow he toppled into my lap, which forced me to topple into Meg's lap, who sat down hard with a startled grunt. Before I could complain that I don't do group massage, my ears popped. All the moisture was sucked out of the air. An acrid smell rolled over me, like fresh tar on an Arizona highway. And across the corridor in front of us roared a sheet of yellow fire, a pulse of pure heat that stopped as quickly as it had begun. My ears crackled, possibly from the blood boiling in my head. My mouth was so dry it was impossible to swallow. I couldn't tell if I was trembling uncontrollably, or if all 3 of us were. What was that? I wondered why my first instinct had been to say who. Something about that blast had felt horribly familiar. In the lingering bitter smoke I thought I detected the stench of hatred, frustration and hunger. Grover's red rasta cap steamed. He smelled of burnt goat hair. That, he said weakly, means we're getting close. We need to hurry. Like I've been saying, Meg grumbled. Now get off. She kneed me in the butt. I struggled to rise, at least as far as I could in the cramped tunnel. With the fire gone, my skin felt clammy. The corridor in front of us had gone dark and silent, as if it couldn't possibly have been a vent for hellfire. But I'd spent enough time on the sun chariot to gauge the heat of flames. If we'd been caught in that blast, we would have been ionized into plasma. We'll have to go left, Grover decided. I said. Left is the direction from which the fire came. It's also the quickest way. How about backwards? Meg suggested. Guys, we're close, Grover insisted. I can feel it, but we've wandered into his part of the maze. If we don't hurry... Screech! The noise echoed from the corridor behind us. I wanted to believe it was some random mechanical sound the labyrinth often generated, a metal door swinging on rusty hinges, or a battery-operated toy from the Halloween clearance store rolling into a bottomless pit. But the look on Grover's face told me what I already suspected. The noise was the cry of a living creature. Screech! The second cry was angrier and much closer. I didn't like what Grover had said about us being in his part of the maze. Who was his referring to? I certainly didn't want to run into a corridor that had an Insta-grill setting, but on the other hand, the cry behind us filled me with terror. Run, Meg said. Run, Grover agreed. We bolted down the left-hand tunnel. The only good news, it was slightly larger, allowing us to flee for our lives with more elbow room. At the next crossroads, we turned left again, then took an immediate right. We jumped a pit, climbed a staircase, and raced down another corridor, but the creature behind us seemed to have no trouble following our scent. Screech! It cried from the darkness. I knew that sound, but my faulty human memory couldn't place it. Some sort of avian creature. Nothing cute like a parakeet or a cockatoo. Something from the infernal regions, dangerous, bloodthirsty, very cranky. We emerged in a circular chamber that looked like the bottom of a giant well. A narrow ramp spiraled up the side of the rough brick wall. What might be at the top, I couldn't tell. I saw no other exits. Screech! The cry grated against the bones of my middle ear. The flutter of wings echoed from the corridor behind us. Or was I hearing multiple birds? Did these things travel in flocks? I had encountered them before. Confound it, I should know this. What now? Meg asked. Up? Grover stared into the gloom above, his mouth hanging open. This doesn't make any sense. This shouldn't be here. Grover, Meg said. Up or no? Yes, up, he yelped. Up is good. No, I said, the back of my neck tingling with dread. We won't make it. We need to block this corridor. Meg frowned. But magic plant stuff, I shouted. Hurry. One thing I will say for Meg, when you need plant stuff done magically, she's your girl. She dug into the pouches on her belt, ripped open a packet of seeds and flung them into the tunnel. Grover whipped out his panpipes. He played a lively jig to encourage growth as Meg knelt before the seeds, her face scrunched in concentration. Together, the Lord of the Wild and the Daughter of Demeter made a super gardening duo. The seeds erupted into tomato plants. Their stems grew, interweaving across the mouth of the tunnel. Leaves unfurled with ultra speed. Tomatoes swelled into fist-sized red fruits. The tunnel was almost closed off when a dark, feathery shape burst through a gap in the net. Talons raked my left cheek as the bird flew past, narrowly missing my eye. The creature circled the room, screeching in triumph, then settled on the spiral ramp 10 feet above us, peering down with round gold eyes like searchlights. An owl? No, it was twice as big as Athena's largest specimens. Its plumage glistened obsidian black. It lifted one leathery red claw, opened its golden beak, and, using its thick black tongue, licked the blood from its talons. My blood. My sight grew fuzzy. My knees turned to rubber. I was dimly aware of other noises coming from the tunnel, frustrated shrieks, the flapping of wings as more demon birds battered against the tomato plants, trying to get through. Meg appeared at my side, her scimitars flashing in her hands, her eyes fixed on the huge dark bird above us. Apollo, you okay? Strix, I said, the name floating up from the recesses of my feeble mortal mind. That thing is a Strix. How do we kill it? Meg asked, always the practical one. I touched the cuts on my face. I could feel neither my cheek nor my fingers. Well, killing it could be a problem. Grover yelped as the Strixes outside screamed and threw themselves at the plants. Guys, we've got 6 or 7 more trying to get in. These tomatoes aren't going to hold them. Apollo, answer me right now, Meg ordered. What do I need to do? I wanted to comply. Really, I did. But I was having trouble forming words. I felt as if Hephaestus had just performed one of his famous tooth extractions on me, and I was still under the influence of his giggle nectar. Killing the bird will curse you, I said finally. And if I don't kill it? Meg asked. Oh, then it will disembowel you, drink your blood and eat your flesh. I grinned, though I had a feeling I hadn't said anything funny. Also, don't let a Strix scratch you. It'll paralyse you. By way of demonstration, I fell over sideways. Above us, the Strix spread its wings and swooped down. Chapter 2. Now I'm a suitcase, duct taped to a satyr's back. Worst morning ever. Stop, Grover yelped. We come in peace. The bird was not impressed. It attacked, only missing the satyr's face because Meg lashed out with her scimitars. The Strix veered, pirouetting between her blades, and landed unscathed a little higher up the spiral ramp. Screech! The Strix yelled, ruffling its feathers. What do you mean, you need to kill us? Grover asked. Meg scowled. You can talk to it? Well, yes, Grover said. It's an animal. Why didn't you tell us what it was saying before now? Meg asked. Because it was just yelling scree, Grover said. Now it's saying scree as in it needs to kill us. I tried to move my legs. They seemed to have turned into sacks of cement, which I found vaguely amusing. I could still move my arms and had some feeling in my chest, but I wasn't sure how long that would last. Perhaps ask the Strix why it needs to kill us, I suggested. Scree! Grover said. I was getting tired of the Strix language. The bird replied in a series of squawks and clicks. Meanwhile, out in the corridor, the other Strixes shrieked and bashed against the net of plants. Black talons and gold beaks poked out, snapping tomatoes into pico de gallo. I figured we had a few minutes at most until the birds burst through and killed us all, but their razor-sharp beaks sure were cute. Grover wrung his hands. The Strix says he's been sent to drink our blood, eat our flesh and disembowel us, not necessarily in that order. He says he's sorry, but it's a direct command from the Emperor. Stupid emperors, Meg grumbled. Which one? I don't know, Grover said. The Strix just calls him Scree. You can translate disembowel, she noted, but you can't translate the Emperor's name. Personally, I was okay with that. Since leaving Indianapolis, I'd spent a lot of time mulling over the dark prophecy we had received in the cave of Trophonius. We had already encountered Nero and Commodus, and I had a dreadful suspicion about the identity of the third emperor, whom we had not yet met. At the moment, I didn't want confirmation. The euphoria of the Strix venom was starting to dissipate. I was about to be eaten alive by a blood-sucking mega-owl. I didn't need any more reasons to weep in despair. The Strix dived at Meg. She dodged aside, whacking the flat of her blade against the bird's tail feathers as it rushed past, sending the unfortunate bird into the opposite wall, where it smacked face first into the brick, exploding in a cloud of monster dust and feathers. Meg, I said, I told you not to kill it. You'll get cursed. I didn't kill it. It committed suicide against that wall. I don't think the fates will see it that way. Then let's not tell them. Guys, Grover pointed to the tomato plants, which were rapidly thinning under the onslaught of claws and beaks. If we can't kill the Strixes, maybe we should strengthen this barrier. He raised his pipes and played. Meg turned her swords back into rings. She stretched her hands towards the tomato plants. The stems thickened and the roots struggled to take hold in the stone floor. But it was a losing battle. Too many Strixes were now battering the other side, ripping through the new growth as fast as it emerged. No good. Meg stumbled back, her face beaded with sweat. Only so much we can do without soil and sunlight. You're right. Grover looked above us, his eyes following the spiral ramp up into the gloom. We're nearly home. If we can just get to the top before the Strixes get through. So we climb, Meg announced. Hello, I said miserably. Paralysed former god here. Grover grimaced at Meg. Duct tape? Duct tape, she agreed. May the gods defend me from heroes with duct tape, and heroes always seem to have duct tape. Meg produced a roll from a pouch on her gardening belt. She propped me into a sitting position, back to back with Grover, then proceeded to loop tape under our armpits, binding me to the satyr as if I were a hiking pack. With Meg's help, Grover staggered to his feet, jostling me around so I got random views of the walls, the floor, Meg's face and my own paralysed legs, man-spreading beneath me. Grover, I asked, will you have enough strength to carry me up all the way up? Satyrs are great climbers, he wheezed. He started up the narrow ramp, my paralysed feet dragging behind us. Meg followed, glancing back every so often at the rapidly deteriorating tomato plants. Apollo, she said, tell me about Strixes. I sifted through my brain, panning for useful nuggets among the sludge. They are birds of ill omen, I said. When they show up, bad things happen. Duh, said Meg. What else? They usually feed on the young and weak. Babies, old people, paralysed gods, that sort of thing. They breed in the upper reaches of Tartarus. I'm only speculating here, but I'm pretty sure they don't make good pets. How do we drive them off, she said. If we can't kill them, how do we stop them? I don't know. Meg sighed in frustration. Talk to the arrow of Dodona, see if it knows anything. I'm going to try buying us some time. She jogged back down the ramp. Talking to the arrow was just about the only way my day could get worse. But I was under orders, and when Meg commanded me, I just had to obey. I reached over my shoulder, groped through my quiver and pulled forth the magic missile. Hello, wise and powerful arrow, I said. Always best to start with flattery. Tookest thee long enough, intoned the arrow. For fortnights untold have I tried to speak with thee. It's been about 48 hours, I said. Verily, time doth creep when one is quivered. Thou shouldst try it and seest how they likest it. Right. I resisted the urge to snap the arrow's shaft. What can you tell me about Strixes? I must speak to thee about... Hold the phone. Strixes? Wherefore talkest to me of those? Because they're about to kill us. Fie, groaned the arrow. Thou should have avoided such dangers. I would never have thought of that, I said. do you have any Strix pertinent information or not, O wise projectile? The arrow buzzed, no doubt trying to access Wikipedia. It denies using the internet. Perhaps, then, it's just a coincidence the arrow is always more helpful when we're in an area with free Wi-Fi. Grover valiantly lugged my sorry, mortal body up the ramp. He huffed and gasped, staggering dangerously close to the edge. The floor of the room was now 50 feet below us, just far enough for a nice, lethal fall. I could see Meg down there pacing, muttering to herself and shaking out more packets of gardening seeds. Above, the ramp seemed to spiral forever. Whatever waited for us at the top, assuming there was a top, remained lost in the darkness. I found it very inconsiderate that the labyrinth did not provide an elevator, or at least a proper handrail. How were heroes with accessibility needs supposed to enjoy this death trap? At last the arrow of Dodona delivered its verdict. Strixes art dangerous. Once again, I said, your wisdom brings light to the darkness. Shut thee up, the arrow continued. The birds can be slain, though this shall curse the slayer and causeth more Strixes to appeareth. Yes, what else? What's it saying? Grover asked between gasps. Among its many irritating qualities, the arrow spoke solely in my mind, so not only did I look like a crazy person when I conversed with it, but I had to constantly report its ramblings to my friends. It's still searching Google, I told Grover. Perhaps, Arrow, you could do a Boolean search. Strix plus defeat. I use not such cheats, the arrow thundered. Then it was silent long enough to type Strix and defeat. The birds may be repelled with pig entrails, it reported. Hast thou any? Grover, I called over my shoulder, would you happen to have any pig entrails? What? He turned, which was not an effective way of facing me, since I was duct-taped to his back. He almost scraped my nose off on the brick wall. Why would I carry pig entrails? I'm a vegetarian. Meg clambered up the ramp to join us. The birds are almost through, she reported. I tried different kinds of plants. I tried to summon peaches. Her voice broke with despair. Since entering the labyrinth, she had been unable to summon her peach spirit minion, who was handy in a fight, but rather picky about when and where he showed up. I suppose that, much like tomato plants, peaches didn't do well underground. Arrow of Dodona, what else? I shouted at its point. There has to be something besides pig intestines that will keep Strixes at bay. Wait, the arrow said. Hark! It appeareth that Arbutus shall serve. Our butters shall what? I demanded. Too late. Below us, with a peal of bloodthirsty shrieks, the Strixes broke through the tomato barricade and swarmed into the room. Chapter 3. Strixes do sucketh. Yea, verily I tell you, much sucking is theirs. Here they come, Meg yelled. Honestly, whenever I wanted her to talk about something important, she shut up. But when we were facing an obvious danger, she wasted her breath yelling, here they come. Grover increased his pace, showing heroic strength as he bounded up the ramp, hauling my flabby duct-taped carcass behind him. Facing backwards, I had a perfect view of the Strixes as they swirled out of the shadows, their yellow eyes flashing like coins in a murky fountain. A dozen birds? More? Given how much trouble we'd had with a single Strix, I didn't like our chances against an entire flock, especially since we were now lined up like juicy targets on a narrow, slippery ledge. I doubted Meg could help all the birds commit suicide by whacking them face first into the wall. Arbutus, I yelled. The arrow said something about arbutus repelling Strixes. That's a plant. Grover gasped for air. I think I met an arbutus once. Arrow, I said, what is an arbutus? I know not, because I was born in a grove doth not maketh me a gardener. Disgusted, I shoved the arrow back into my quiver. Apollo, cover me. Meg thrust out one of her swords into my hand, and then rifled through her gardening belt, glancing nervously at the Strixes as they ascended. How Meg expected me to cover her, I wasn't sure. I was garbage at swordplay, even when I wasn't duct-taped to a satyr's back and facing targets that would curse anyone who killed them. Grover, Meg yelled, can we figure out what type of plant an arbutus is? She ripped open a random packet and tossed seeds into the void. They burst like heated popcorn kernels and formed grenade-sized yams with leafy green stems. They fell among the flock of Strixes, hitting a few and causing startled squawking, but the birds kept coming. Those are tubers, Grover wheezed. I think an arbutus is a fruit plant. Meg ripped open a second seed packet. She showered the Strixes with an explosion of bushes dotted with green fruits. The birds simply veered around them. Grapes? Grover asked. Gooseberries? Said Meg. Are you sure? Grover asked. The shape of the leaves. Grover, I snapped. Let's restrict ourselves to military botany. What's a duck? Duck! Now, gentle reader, you be the judge. Was I asking the question, what's a duck? Or of course I wasn't. Despite Meg's later complaints, I was trying to warn her that the nearest Strix was charging straight at her face. She didn't understand my warning, which was not my fault. I swung my borrowed scimitar, attempting to protect my young friend. Only my terrible aim and Meg's quick reflexes prevented me from decapitating her. "Stop that!" she yelled, swatting the Strix aside with her other blade. "You said cover me," I protested. "I didn't mean—" She cried out in pain, stumbling as a bloody cut opened along her right thigh. Then we were engulfed in an angry storm of talons, beaks, and black wings. Meg swung her scimitar wildly. A Strix launched itself at my face, its claws about to rip my eyes out, when Grover did the unexpected. He screamed. Why is that surprising, you may be asking, when you're swarmed by entrail-devouring birds? It is a perfect time to scream. True, but the sound that came from the satyr's mouth was no ordinary cry. It reverberated through the chamber like the shock wave of a bomb, scattering the birds, shaking the stones, and filling me with cold, unreasoning fear. Had I not been duct-taped to the satyr's back, I would have fled. I would have jumped off the ledge just to get away from that sound. As it was, I dropped Meg's sword and clamped my hands over my ears. Meg, lying prone on the ramp, bleeding and no doubt already partially paralysed by the Strix's poison, curled into a ball and buried her head in her arms. The Strixes fled down into the darkness. My heart pounded. Adrenaline surged through me. I needed several deep breaths before I could speak. "Grover," I said, "did you just summon panic?" I couldn't see his face, but I could feel him shaking. He lay down on the ramp, rolling to one side so I faced the wall. "I didn't mean to." Grover's voice was hoarse. "Haven't done that in years." Panic?" Meg asked. "The cry of the lost god Pan," I said. Even saying his name filled me with sadness. Ah, what good times the nature god and I had had in ancient days, dancing and cavorting in the wilderness. Pan had been a first-class cavorter. Then humans destroyed most of the wilderness, and Pan faded into nothing. You humans, you're why we gods can't have nice things. "I've never heard anyone but Pan use that power," I said. "How?" Grover made a sound that was a half-sob, half-sigh. "Long story." Meg grunted. "Got rid of the birds anyway. I heard her ripping fabric, probably making a bandage for her leg." "Are you paralysed?" I asked. "Yeah," she muttered. "Waist down." Grover shifted in our duct-tape harness. "I'm still okay, but exhausted. The birds will be back, and there's no way I can carry you up the ramp now." I did not doubt him. The shout of Pan would scare away almost anything, but it was a taxing bit of magic. Every time Pan used it, he would have a 3-day nap afterwards. Below us, the Strix's cries echoed through the labyrinth. Their screeching already sounded like it was turning from fear, fly away, to confusion. Why are we flying away? I tried to wriggle my feet. To my surprise, I could now feel my toes inside my socks. "Can someone cut me loose?" I asked. "I think the poison is losing strength." From her horizontal position, Meg used a scimitar to saw me out of the duct tape. The three of us lined up with our backs literally to the wall. 3 sweaty, sad, pathetic pieces of Strix bait, waiting to die. Below us, the squawking of the doom birds got louder. Soon they'd be back, angrier than ever. About 50 feet above us, just visible now in the dim glint of Meg's swords, our ramp dead-ended at a domed brick ceiling. "So much for an exit," Grover said. "I thought for sure. This shaft looks so much like—" He shook his head, as if he couldn't bear to tell us what he'd hoped. "I'm not dying here," Meg grumbled. Her appearance said otherwise. She had bloody knuckles and skinned knees. Her green dress, a prize gift from Percy Jackson's mother, looked like it had been used as a saber-toothed tiger's scratching post. She had ripped off her left legging and used it to staunch the bleeding cut on her thigh, but the fabric was already soaked through. Nevertheless, her eyes shone defiantly. The rhinestones still glittered on the tips of her cat-eye glasses. I'd learned never to count out Meg McCaffrey while her rhinestones still glittered. She rummaged through her seed packages, squinting at the labels. Roses, daffodils, squash, carrots. No, Grover bumped his fist against the forehead. Arbutus is like a flowering tree. I should know this. I sympathised with his memory problems. I should have known many things. The weakness of Strix's, the nearest secret exit from the labyrinth, Zeus's private number so I could call him and plead for my life. But my mind was blank. My legs had begun to tremble, perhaps a sign I would soon be able to walk again. But this didn't cheer me up. I had nowhere to go, except to choose whether I wanted to die at the top of this chamber or the bottom. Meg kept shuffling seed packets. Rutabaga, wisteria, pyracantha, strawberries. Strawberries! Grover yelped so loudly, I thought he was trying for another blast of panic. That's it, the arbutus is a strawberry tree. Meg frowned. Strawberries don't grow on trees. They're genus Fragaria, part of the rose family. Yes, I know. Grover rolled his hands like he couldn't get the words out fast enough. And Arbutus is in the Heath family, but... What are you talking about? I demanded. I wondered if they were sharing the Arrow of Dodona's Wi-Fi connection to look up information in botany.com. We're about to die, and you're arguing about plant genera. Fragaria might be close enough, Grover insisted. Arbutus fruit looks like strawberries. That's why it's called a strawberry tree. I met an Arbutus dryad once. We got on in this big argument about it. Besides, I specialise in strawberry growing. All the satyrs from Camp Half-Blood do. Meg stared doubtfully at her packet of strawberry seeds. I dunno. Below us, a dozen Strixes burst forth from the mouth of the tunnel, shrieking in a chorus of pre-disembowelment fury. Try the Fraggle Rock, I yelled. Fragaria, Meg corrected. Whatever. Rather than throwing her strawberry seeds into the void, Meg ripped open the packet and shook them out along the edge of the ramp with maddening slowness. Hurry, I fumbled for my bow. We've got maybe 30 seconds? Hold on. Meg tapped out the last of the seeds. 15 seconds. Wait. Meg tossed aside the packet. She placed her hands over the seeds like she was about to play the keyboard, which, by the way, she can't do well, despite my efforts to teach her. Okay, she said. Go. Grover raised his pipes and began a frantic version of Strawberry Fields Forever in triple time. I forgot about my bow and grabbed my ukulele, joining him in the song. I didn't know if it would help, but if I was going to get ripped apart, at least I wanted to go out playing the Beatles. Just as the wave of Strixes were about to hit, the seeds exploded like a battery of fireworks. Green streamers arced across the void, anchoring against the far wall and forming a row of vines that reminded me of the strings of a giant lute. The Strixes could have easily flown through the gaps, but instead they went crazy, veering to avoid the plants and colliding with each other in mid-air. Meanwhile, the vines thickened, leaves unfurled, white flowers bloomed and strawberries ripened, filling the air with their sweet fragrance. The chamber rumbled. Wherever the strawberry plants touched the stone, the brick cracked and dissolved, giving the strawberries an easier place to root. Meg lifted her hands from her imaginary keyboard. Is the labyrinth helping? I don't know, I said, strumming furiously on an F minor 7. But don't stop. With impossible speed, the strawberries spread across the walls in a tide of green. I was just thinking, wow, imagine what the plants could do with sunlight. When the domed ceiling cracked like an eggshell, brilliant rays stabbed through the darkness. Chunks of rock rained down, smashing into the birds punching through strawberry vines, which, unlike the Strixes, grew back almost immediately. As soon as the sunlight hit the birds, they screamed and dissolved into dust. Grover lowered his panpipes. I set down my ukulele. We watched in amazement as the plants continued to grow, interlacing until a strawberry runner trampoline stretched across the entire area of the room at our feet. The ceiling had disintegrated, revealing a brilliant blue sky. Hot, dry air wafted down like the breath from an open oven. Grover raised his face to the light. He sniffled, tears glistening on his cheeks. Are you hurt? I asked. He stared at me. The heartbreak on his face was more painful to look at than the sunlight. The smell of warm strawberries, he said, like Camp Half-Blood. It's been so long. I felt an unfamiliar twinge in my chest. I patted Grover's knee. I had not spent much time at Camp Half-Blood, the training ground for Greek demigods on Long Island, but I understood how he felt. I wondered how my children were doing there. Kayla, Will, Austin. I remembered sitting with them in the campfire singing My Mother Was a Minotaur as we ate burnt marshmallows off a stick. Such perfect camaraderie is rare, even in an immortal life. Meg leaned against the wall. Her complexion was pasty, her breathing ragged. I dug through my pockets and found a broken square of ambrosia in a napkin. I did not keep the stuff for myself. In my mortal state, eating the food of the gods might cause me to spontaneously combust. But Meg, I had found, was not always good about taking her ambrosia. Eat. I pressed the napkin into her hand. It'll help the paralysis pass more quickly. She clenched her jaw, as if about to yell, I don't wanna, and then apparently decided she liked the idea of having working legs again. She began nibbling on the ambrosia. What's up there? She asked, frowning at the blue sky. Grover brushed the tears from his face. We've made it. The labyrinth brought us right to our base. Our base? I was delighted to learn we had a base. I hoped that meant security, a soft bed, and perhaps an espresso machine. Yeah, Grover swallowed nervously. Assuming anything is left of it. Let's find out. Chapter 4. Welcome to my base. We have rocks, sand and ruins. Did I mention rocks? They tell me I reached the surface. I don't remember. Meg was partially paralysed and Grover had already carried me halfway up the ramp, so it seems wrong that I was the one who passed out. But what can I say? That FM7 chord on Strawberry Fields Forever must have taken more out of me than I realised. I do remember feverish dreams. Before me rose a graceful, olive-skinned woman, her long auburn hair gathered up in a donut braid, her sleeveless dress as light and grey as moth's wings. She looked about 20, but her eyes were black pearls, their hard lustre formed over centuries, a defensive shell hiding untold sorrow and disappointment. They were the eyes of an immortal who had seen great civilizations fall. We stood together on a stone platform at the edge of what looked like an indoor swimming pool filled with lava. The air shimmered with heat, ashes stung my eyes. The woman raised her arms in a supplicating gesture. Glowing red iron cuffs shackled her wrists. Molten chains anchored her to the platform, though the hot metal did not seem to burn her. "I am sorry," she said. Somehow, I knew she wasn't speaking to me. I was only observing this scene through the eyes of someone else. She just delivered bad news to this other person, crushing news, though I had no idea what it was. "I would spare you if I could," she continued. "I would spare her, but I cannot. Tell Apollo he must come. Only he can release me, though it is a—" She choked as if a shard of glass had wedged in her throat. "4 letters, she croaked. "Starts with T." Trap, I thought. The answer is trap. I felt briefly thrilled, the way you do when you're watching a game show and you know the answer. If only I were the contestant, you think, I'd win all the prizes. Then I realised I didn't like this game show, especially if the answer was trap, especially if that trap was the grand prize waiting for me. The woman's image dissolved into flames. I found myself in a different place, a covered terrace overlooking a moonlit bay. In the distance, shrouded in mist, rose the familiar dark profile of Mount Vesuvius. But Vesuvius, as it had been before the eruption of 79 CE, blew its summit to pieces, destroying Pompeii and wiping out thousands of Romans. You can blame Vulcan for that. He was having a bad week. The evening sky was bruised purple, the coastline lit only by firelight, the moon and the stars. Under my feet the terrace's mosaic floor glittered with gold and silver tiles, the sort of artwork very few Romans could afford. On the walls, multicoloured frescoes were framed in silk draperies that had to have cost hundreds of thousands of denarii. I knew where I must be, an imperial villa, one of the many pleasure palaces that lined the Gulf of Naples in the early days of the empire. Normally, such a place would have blazed with a light throughout the night, as a show of power and opulence, but the torches on this terrace were dark, wrapped in black cloth. In the shadow of a column, a slender young man stood facing the sea. His expression was obscured, but his posture spoke of impatience. He tugged on his white robes, crossed his arms over his chest and tapped his sandaled foot against the floor. A second man appeared, marching into the terrace with the clink of armour and the laboured breathing of a heavy-set fighter. A Praetorian guard's helmet hid his face. He knelt before the younger man. "It is done, Princeps." Princeps, Latin for first in line or first citizen, that lovely euphemism the Roman emperors used to downplay just how absolute their power was. "Are you sure this time?" asked a young, reedy voice. "I don't want any more surprises." The praetor grunted. "Very sure, Princeps." The guard held out his massive, hairy forearms. Bloody scratches glistened in the moonlight as if desperate fingernails had raked his flesh. "What did you use?" The younger man sounded fascinated. "His own pillow," the big man said. "Seemed easiest." The younger man laughed. "The old pig deserved it. I wait years for him to die. Finally we announce he's kicked the situla, and he has the nerve to wake up again. I don't think so. Tomorrow will be a new, better day for Rome." He stepped into the moonlight, revealing his face, a face I had hoped never to see again. He was handsome in a thin, angular way, though his ears stuck out a bit too much. His smile was twisted. His eyes had all the warmth of a barracuda's. Even if you do not recognise his features, dear reader, I am sure you have met him. He is the school bully too charming to get caught, the one who thinks up the cruelest pranks, has others carry out his dirty work, and still maintains a perfect reputation with the teachers. He is the boy who pulls the legs off insects and tortures stray animals, yet laughs with such pure delight. He can almost convince you he is harmless fun. He's the boy who steals money from the temple collection plates, behind the backs of old ladies who praise him for being such a nice young man. He is that person, that type of evil. And tonight he had a new name, which would not foretell a better day for Rome. The Praetorian guard lowered his head. "Hail, Caesar." I awoke from my dream shivering. "Good timing," Grover said. I sat up. My head throbbed. My mouth tasted like Strix dust. I was lying under a makeshift lean-to, a blue plastic tarp set on a hillside overlooking the desert. The sun was going down. Next to me, Meg was curled up asleep, her hand resting on my wrist. I suppose that was sweet, except I knew where her fingers had been. Hint, in her nostrils. On a nearby slab of rock, Grover sat sipping water from his flask. Judging from his weary expression, I guessed he had been keeping watch over us while we slept. "I passed out," I gathered. He tossed me the flask. "I thought I slept hard. You've been out for hours." I took a drink, then rubbed the gunk from my eyes, wishing I could wipe the dreams from my head as easily. A woman chained in a fiery room, a trap for Apollo, a new Caesar with the pleasant smile of a fine young sociopath. Don't think about it, I told myself. Dreams aren't necessarily true. No, I answered myself, only the bad ones like those. I focused on Meg, snoring in the shade of our tarp. Her leg was freshly bandaged. She wore a clean t-shirt over her tattered dress. I tried to extricate my wrist from her grip, but she held on tighter. She's all right, Grover assured me, at least physically. Fell asleep after we got you situated. He frowned. She didn't seem happy about being here, though. Said she couldn't handle this place. Wanted to leave. I was afraid she'd jump back into the labyrinth, but I convinced her she needed to rest first. I played some music to relax her. I scanned our surroundings, wondering what had upset Meg so badly. Below us stretched a landscape only slightly more hospitable than Mars. I mean, the planet, not the god, though I suppose neither is much of a host. Sun-blasted ochre mountains ringed a valley patchworked with unnaturally green golf courses, dusty barren flats and sprawling neighbourhoods of white stucco walls, red-tiled roofs and blue swimming pools. Lining the streets, rows of listless palm trees stuck up like raggedy seams. Asphalt parking lots shimmered in the heat. A brown haze hung in the air, filling the valley like watery gravy. Palm Springs, I said. I'd known the city well in the 1950s. I was pretty sure I'd hosted a party with Frank Sinatra just down the road there, by the golf course, but it felt like another life. Probably because it had been. Now the area seemed much less welcoming, the temperature too scorching for an early spring evening, the air too heavy and acrid. Something was wrong, something I couldn't quite place. I scanned our immediate surroundings. We were cramped at the crest of a hill. The San Jacinto wilderness at our backs at the west. The sprawl of Palm Springs at our feet to the east. A gravel road skirted the base of the hill, winding towards the nearest neighbourhood, about half a mile below. But I could tell that our hilltop had once boasted a large structure. Sunk in the rocky slope were half a dozen hollow brickwork cylinders, each perhaps 30 feet in diameter, like the shells of ruined sugar mills. The structures were of varying heights, in varying stages of disintegration, but their tops were all level with one another, so I guess they must have been massive support columns for a stilt house, judging from the detritus that littered the hillside, shards of glass, charred planks, blackened clumps of brick. I guessed that the house must have burned down many years before. Then I realised we must have climbed out of one of those cylinders to escape the labyrinth. I turned to Grover. The Strixes? He shook his head. If any survived, they wouldn't risk the daylight. Even if they could get through the strawberries. The plants have filled the entire shaft. He pointed to the furthest ring of brickwork, where we must have emerged. Nobody's getting in or out that way anymore. But I gestured at the ruins. Surely this isn't your base? I was hoping he would correct me. Oh no, our base is that nice house down there with the Olympic-sized swimming pool, right next to the 15th hole. Instead, he had the nerve to look pleased. Yeah, this place has powerful natural energy. It's a perfect sanctuary. Can't you feel the life force? I picked up a charred brick. Life force? You'll see. Grover took off his cap and scratched between his horns. The way things have been, all the dryads have to stay dormant until sunset. It's the only way they can survive, but they'll be waking up soon. The way things have been. I glanced west. The sun had just dropped behind the mountains. The sky was marbled with heavy layers of red and black, more appropriate for Mordor than Southern California. What's going on? I asked, not sure I wanted the answer. Grover gazed sadly into the distance. You haven't seen the news? Biggest forest fires in state history, on top of the drought, the heat waves and the earthquakes. He shuddered. Thousands of dryads have died. Thousands more have gone into hibernation. If these are just normal natural disasters, that would be bad enough, but... Meg yelped in her sleep. She sat up abruptly, blinking in confusion. From the panic in her eyes, I guessed her dreams had been even worse than mine. We're really here, she asked. I didn't dream it. It's all right, I said. You're safe. She shook her head, her lips quivering. No, I'm not. With fumbling fingers, she removed her glasses, as if she might be able to handle her surroundings better if they were fuzzier. I can't be here. Not again. Again? I asked. A line from the Indiana prophecy tugged at my memory. Demeter's daughter finds her ancient roots. You mean you lived here? Meg scanned the ruins. She shrugged miserably, though whether that meant I don't know or I don't want to talk about it, I couldn't tell. The desert seemed an unlikely home for Meg, a street kid from Manhattan, raised in Nero's royal household. Grover tugged thoughtfully at his goatee. A child of Demeter. That actually makes a lot of sense. I stared at him. In this place, a child of Vulcan, perhaps, or Feronia, the wilderness goddess, or even Mephitis, the goddess of poisonous gas. But Demeter, what is a child of Demeter supposed to grow here? Rocks? Grover looked hurt. You don't understand. Once you meet everybody. Meg crawled out from beneath the tarp. She got unsteadily to her feet. I have to leave. Hold on, Grover pleaded. We need your help. At least talk to the others. Meg hesitated. Others? Grover gestured north. I couldn't see what he was pointing to until I stood up. Then I noticed, half hidden behind the brick ruins, a row of 6 boxy white structures like storage sheds. No, greenhouses. The one nearest the ruins had melted and collapsed long ago, no doubt a victim of the fire. The second hut's corrugated polycarbonate walls and roof had fallen apart like a house of cards. But the other 4 looked intact. Clay flower pots were stacked outside. The doors stood open. Inside, green plant matter pressed against the translucent walls. Palm fronds like giant hands pushing to get out. I didn't see how anything could live in this scalded barren wasteland, especially inside a greenhouse meant to keep the climate even warmer. I definitely didn't want to get any closer to these claustrophobic hot boxes. Grover smiled encouragingly. I'm sure everyone's awake by now. Come on, I'll introduce you to the gang. Chapter 5. First Aid Succulent. Heal me of my many cuts, but no slime trail, please. Grover led us to the first intact greenhouse, which exuded a smell like the breath of Persephone. That's not a compliment. Miss Springtime used to sit next to me at family dinners, and she was not shy about sharing her halitosis. Imagine the odour of a bin full of wet mulch and earthworm poop. Yes, I just love spring. Inside the greenhouse, the plants had taken over. I found that frightening, since most of them were cacti. By the doorway squatted a pineapple cactus the size of a barrel, its yellow spines like shish kebab skewers. In the back corner stood a majestic Joshua tree, its shaggy branches holding up the roof. Against the opposite wall bloomed a massive prickly pear, dozens of bristly paddles topped with purple fruit that looked delicious, except for the fact that each one had more spikes than Aries' favourite mace. Metal tables groaned under the weight of other succulents, pickleweed, spiny star, cholla, and dozens more I couldn't name. Surrounded by so many fawns and flowers, in such oppressive heat, I had a flashback to Iggy Pop's 2003 Coachella set. I'm back, Grover announced, and I brought friends. Silence. Even at sunset, the temperature inside was so high and the air so thick, I imagined I would die of heat stroke in approximately 4 minutes. And I was a former sun god. At last, the first dryad appeared. A chlorophyll bubble ballooned from the side of a prickly pear and burst into green mist. The droplets coalesced into a small girl with emerald skin, spiky yellow hair and a fringed dress made entirely of cactus bristles. Her glare was almost as pointed as her dress. Fortunately, it was directed at Grover, not me. Where have you been? She demanded. Grover cleared his throat. I got called away. Magical summons. I'll tell you about it later. But look, I brought Apollo and Meg, daughter of Demeter. He showed off Meg like she was a fabulous prize on The Price is Right. Said the dryad. I suppose daughters of Demeter are okay, but I'm a prickly pear, or pear for short. Hi, Meg said weakly. The dryad narrowed her eyes at me. Given her spiny dress, I hope she wasn't a hugger. You're Apollo, as in the god Apollo, she asked. I don't believe it. Some days neither do I admitted. Grover scanned the room. Where are the others? Right on cue, another chlorophyll bubble popped over one of the succulents. A second dryad appeared, a large young woman in a muumuu like the husk of an artichoke. Her hair was a forest of dark green triangles. Her face and arms glistened as if they'd just been oiled. At least I hoped it was oil and not sweat. Oh, she cried, seeing our battered appearances. Are you hurt? Pear rolled her eyes. Al, knock it off. But they look hurt. Al shuffled forward. She took my hand. Her touch was cold and greasy. Let me take care of these cuts at least. Grover, why didn't you heal these people? These poor people. I tried, the satyr protested. They just took a lot of damage. That could be my life motto, I thought. He takes a lot of damage. Al ran her fingertips over my cuts, leaving trails of goo like slug tracks. It was not a pleasant sensation, but it did ease the pain. You're aloe vera, I realised. I used to make healing ointments out of you. She beamed. He remembers me. Apollo remembers me. In the back of the room, a third dryad emerged from the trunk of the Joshua tree, a male dryad, which was quite rare. His skin was as brown as his tree's bark, his olive hair long and wild, his clothes weathered khaki. He might have been an explorer just returning from the outback. I'm Joshua, he said. Welcome to Athalas. At that moment, Meg McCaffrey decided to faint. I could have told her that swooning in front of an attractive boy was never cool. The strategy hadn't worked for me once in thousands of years. Nevertheless, being a good friend, I caught her before she could nosedive into the gravel. Oh, poor girl. Aloe Vera gave Grover another critical look. She's exhausted and overheated. Haven't you let her rest? She's been asleep all afternoon. Well, she's dehydrated. Aloe put her hand on Meg's forehead. She needs water. Pear sniffed. Don't we all? Take her to the cistern, Al said. Melly should be awake by now. I'll be along in a minute. Grover perked up. Melly's here. They made it. They arrived this morning, said Joshua. What about the search parties? Grover pressed. Any word? The Dryads exchanged troubled glances. The news isn't good, Joshua said. Only one group has come back so far and... Excuse me, I pleaded. I have no idea what any of you are talking about, but Meg is heavy. Where should I put her? Grover stirred. Right, sorry, I'll show you. He draped Meg's left arm over his shoulders, taking half her weight. Then he faced the Dryads. Guys, how about we all meet at the cistern for dinner? We've got a lot to talk about. Joshua nodded. I'll alert the other greenhouses. And Grover, you promised us enchiladas 3 days ago. I know, Grover sighed. I'll get more. Together, the two of us lugged Meg out of the greenhouse. As we dragged her across the hillside, I asked Grover my most burning question. Dryads eat enchiladas? He looked offended. Of course. You expect them to just eat fertilizer? Well, yes. Stereotyping, he muttered. I decided that was my cue to change the subject. Did I imagine it, I asked, or did Meg faint because she heard the name of this place? Ephalos. That's ancient Greek for evergreen, if I recall correctly. It seemed an odd name for a place in the desert. Then again, no odder than Dryads eating enchiladas. We found the name carved into the old doorstep, Grover said. There's a lot we don't know about the ruins, but like I said, this site has a lot of nature energy. Whoever lived here and started the greenhouses, they knew what they were doing. I wished I could say the same. Weren't the Dryads born in those greenhouses? Don't they know who planted them? Most were too young when the house burned down, Grover said. Some of the older plants might know more, but they've gone dormant, or... He nodded towards the destroyed greenhouses. They're no longer with us. We observed a moment of silence for the departed succulents. Grover steered us towards the largest of the brick cylinders. Judging from its size and position in the centre of the ruins, I guessed it must once have been the central support column for the structure. At ground level, rectangular openings ringed the circumference like medieval castle windows. We dragged Meg through one of these and found ourselves in a space very much like the well where we'd fought the Strixes. The top was open to the sky. A spiral ramp led downward, but fortunately only 20 feet before reaching the bottom. In the centre of the dirt floor, like the hole in a giant donut, glittered a dark blue pool, cooling the air and making the space feel comfortable and welcoming. Around the pool lay a ring of sleeping bags. Blooming cacti overflowed from alcoves built into the walls. The cistern was not a fancy structure, nothing like the dining pavilion at Camp Half-Blood or the way station in Indiana, but instead, inside it I immediately felt better, safer. I understood what Grover had been talking about. This place resonated with soothing energy. We got Meg to the bottom of the ramp without tripping and falling, which I considered a major accomplishment. We sat her down on one of the sleeping bags, and then Grover scanned the room. Melly, he called. Gleason, are you guys here? The name Gleason sounded vaguely familiar to me, but as usual, I couldn't place it. No chlorophyll bubbles popped from the plants. Meg turned on her side and muttered in her sleep. Something about peaches. Then, at the edge of the pond, wisps of white fog began to gather. They fused into the shape of a petite woman in a silvery dress. Her dark hair floated around her as if she were underwater, revealing her slightly pointed ears. In a sling over one shoulder she held a sleeping baby, perhaps 7 months old, with hooved feet and tiny goat horns on his head. His fat cheek was squished against his mother's clavicle. His mouth was a veritable cornucopia of drool. The cloud nymph, for surely that's what she was, smiled at Grover. Her brown eyes were bloodshot from a lack of sleep. She held one finger to her lips, indicating that she'd rather not wake the baby. I couldn't blame her. Satyr babies at that age are loud and rambunctious, and can teeve their way through several metal cans a day. Grover whispered, Melly, you made it. Grover, dear. She looked down at the sleeping form of Meg, and then tilted her head at me. Are you him? If you mean Apollo, I said. I'm afraid so. Melly pursed her lips. I'd heard rumours, but I didn't believe them. You poor thing. How are you holding up? In times past, I would have scoffed at any nymph who dared to call me poor thing. Of course, few nymphs would have shown me such consideration. Usually they were too busy running away from me. Now Melly's show of concern caused a lump to form in my throat. I was tempted to rest my head on her other shoulder and sob out my troubles. I'm fine, I managed. Thank you. And your sleeping friend here?" she asked. "Just exhausted, I think, though I wondered if that was the whole story with Meg. Aloe Vera said she would be along in a few minutes to take care of her." Melly looked worried. "All right, I'll make sure Aloe doesn't overdo it." "Overdo it?" Grover coughed. "Ahem, where's Gleason?" Melly scanned the room, as if just realising this Gleason person was not present. "I don't know. As soon as we got here, I went dormant for the day. He said he was going into town to pick up some camping supplies. What time is it?" "After sunset," Grover said. "He should have been back by now." Melly's form shimmered with agitation, becoming so hazy I was afraid the baby might fall right through her body. "Gleason is your husband," I guessed. "A satyr?" "Yes, Gleason Hedge," Melly said. I remembered him then, vaguely, the satyr who had sailed with the demigod heroes of the Argo too. "Do you know where he went?" "We passed an army surplus store as we drove in, down the hill. He loves army surplus stores." Melly turned to Grover. "He may have just got distracted, but I don't suppose you could go check on him." At that moment, I realised just how exhausted Grover Underwood must be. His eyes were even redder than Melly's, his shoulders drooped, his reed pipes dangled listlessly from his neck. Unlike Meg and me, he hadn't slept since last night in the labyrinth. He'd used the cry of Pan, got us to safety, then spent all day guarding us, waiting for the Dryads to wake up. Now he was being asked to make another excursion to check on Gleason Hedge. Still, he mustered a smile. "Sure thing, Melly." She gave him a peck on the cheek. "You're the best Lord of the Wild ever." Grover blushed. "Watch Meg McCaffrey until we get back, would you? Come on, Apollo. Let's go shopping." Chapter 6. Random plumes of fire. Ground squirrels nibble my nerves. I love the desert. Even after 4,000 years, I could still learn important life lessons. For instance, never go shopping with a satyr. Finding the store took forever, because Grover kept getting sidetracked. He stopped to chat with a yucca. He gave directions to a family of ground squirrels. He smelled smoke and led us on a chase across the desert until he found a burning cigarette someone had dropped onto the road. "This is how fires start," he said, then responsibly disposed of the cigarette butt by eating it. I didn't see anything within a mile radius that could have caught fire. I was reasonably sure rocks and soil were not flammable, but I never argue with people who eat cigarettes. We continued our search for the army surplus store. Night fell. The western horizon glowed, not with the usual orange of mortal light pollution, but with the ominous red of a distant inferno. Smoke blotted out the stars. The temperature barely cooled. The air still smelled bitter and wrong. I remembered the wave of flames that had nearly incinerated us in the labyrinth. The heat seemed to have had a personality, a resentful malevolence. I could imagine such waves coursing beneath the surface of the desert, washing through the labyrinth, turning the mortal terrain above into even more uninhabitable wasteland. I thought about my dream of the woman in molten chains, standing on a platform above a pool of lava. Despite my fuzzy memories, I'm sure that woman was the Etherian Sibyl, the next oracle we had to free from the emperors. Something told me she was imprisoned in the very centre of whatever was generating those subterranean fires. I did not relish the idea of finding her. "Grover," I said, "in the greenhouse you mentioned something about search parties?" He glanced over, swallowing painfully as if the cigarette butt was still stuck in his throat. "The heartiest satyrs and dryads. They've been fanning out across the area for months." He fixed his eyes on the road. "We don't have many searchers. With the fires and the heat, the cacti are the only nature spirits that can still manifest, so far only a few have come back alive. The rest, we don't know." "What are they searching for?" I asked. "The source of the fires? The Emperor? The Oracle?" Grover's hoof-fitted shoes slipped and skidded on the gravel shoulder. "Everything is connected. It has to be. I didn't know about the Oracle until you told me, but if the Emperor is guarding it, the maze is where he would put it, and the maze is the source of our fire problems." "When you say maze," I said, "you mean the labyrinth?" "Sort of." Grover's lower lip trembled. "The network of tunnels under Southern California. We assume it's part of the larger labyrinth, but something's been happening to it. It's like this section of the labyrinth has been infected, like it has a fever. Fires have been gathering, strengthening. Sometimes they mass and spew. There!" He pointed south. A quarter of a mile up the nearest hill, a plume of yellow flame vented skyward like the fiery tip of a welding torch. Then it was gone, leaving a patch of molten rock. I considered what would have happened if I'd been standing there when the vent flared. "That's not normal," I said. My ankles felt wobbly, as if I were the one with fake feet. Grover nodded. "We already had enough problems in California. Drought, climate change, pollution, all the usual stuff. But those flames?" His expression hardened. "It's some kind of magic we don't understand. Almost a full year I've been out here, trying to find the source of the heat and shut it off. I've lost so many friends." His voice was brittle. I understood about losing friends. Over the centuries I'd lost many mortals who were dear to me, but at that moment one in particular came to mind. Heloise the Griffin, who had died at the way station, defending her nest, defending us all from the attack of Emperor Commodus. I remembered her frail body, her feathers disintegrating into a bed of catnip in Emmy's roof garden. Grover knelt and cupped his hand around a clump of weeds. The leaves crumbled. "Too late," he muttered. "When I was a seeker looking for Pan, at least I had hope. I thought I could find Pan and he'd save us all. Now, the god of the wild is dead." I scanned the glittering lights of Palm Springs, trying to imagine Pan in such a place. Humans had done quite a number on the natural world. No wonder Pan had faded and passed on. What remained of his spirit he'd left to his followers, the satyrs and dryads, entrusting them with his mission to protect the wild. I could have told Pan that was a terrible idea. I once went on vacation and entrusted the realm of music to my follower, Nelson Riddle. Came back a few decades later and found pop music infected with sappy violins and backup singers, and Lawrence Welk was playing the accordion on primetime television. Never again. "Pan would be proud of your efforts," I told Grover. Even to me that sounded half-hearted. Grover rose. "My father and my uncle sacrificed their lives searching for Pan. I just wish we had more help carrying on his work. Humans don't seem to care, even demigods, even—" He stopped himself, but I suspected he was about to say even gods. I had to admit he had a point. Gods wouldn't normally mourn the loss of a griffin or a few dryads or a single ecosystem. Hey, we would think, doesn't concern me. The longer I was mortal, the more affected I was by even the smallest loss. I hated being mortal. We followed the road as it skirted the walls of a gated community, leading us towards the neon store signs in the distance. I watched where I put my feet, wondering with each step if a plume of fire might turn me into a Leicester flambe. "You said everything is connected," I recalled. "You think the third emperor created this burning maze?" Grover glanced over from side to side, as if the third emperor might jump out from behind a palm tree with an axe and a scary mask. Given my suspicions about the emperor's identity, that might not be too far-fetched. "Yes," he said, "but we don't know how or why. We don't even know where the emperor's base is. As far as we can tell, he moves around constantly." "And," I swallowed, afraid to ask, "the emperor's identity?" "All we know is that he uses the monogram NH, said Grover, for Neos Helios. A phantom ground squirrel gnawed its way up my spine. Greek, meaning new sun. Right, Grover said. Not a Roman emperor's name. No, I thought, but it was one of his favourite titles. I decided not to share that information, not here in the dark, with only a jumpy satyr for company. If I confessed that I now knew, Grover and I might break down and sob in each other's arms, which would be both embarrassing and unhelpful. We passed the gates of the neighbourhood. Desert Palms. Had someone really got paid to think up that name? We continued to the nearest commercial street, where fast food joints and gas stations shimmered. I hoped Melly and Gleason would have new information, Grover said. They've been staying in LA with some demigods. I thought maybe they'd had more luck tracking down the Emperor or finding the heart of the maze. Is that why the Hedge family came to Palm Springs? I asked. To share information? Partly. Grover's tone hinted at a darker, sadder reason behind Melly and Gleason's arrival, but I didn't press. We stopped at a major intersection. Across the boulevard stood a warehouse store with a glowing red sign, Marco's Military Madness. The parking lot was empty except for an old yellow Pinto parked near the entrance. I read the store sign again. On second look, I realised the name was not Marco. It was Macro. Perhaps I'd developed a bit of a demigod dyslexia simply from hanging around them too long. Military Madness sounded like exactly the sort of place I didn't want to go. And macro, as in large world view or computer program or something else. Why did that name unleash another herd of ground squirrels into my nervous system? It looks closed, I said dully. Must be the wrong army surplus store. No, Grover pointed to the Pinto. That's Gleason's car. Of course it is, I thought. With my luck, how could it not be? I wanted to run away. I did not like the way the giant red sign washed the tarmac in blood-stained light, but Grover Underwood had led us through the labyrinth, and after all his talk about losing friends, I was not about to let him lose another. Well then, I said, let's go and find Gleason Hedge. Chapter 7. Family fun packs should be for frozen pizzas, not for frag grenades. How hard could it be to find a satyr in an army surplus store? As it turned out, quite hard. Macro's Military Madness stretched on forever, aisle after aisle of equipment no self-respecting army would want. Near the entrance, a giant bin with a neon purple sign promised PIF helmets, buy 3 get 1 free, and an end-of-aisle display featured a Christmas tree built of stacked propane tanks with garlands of blowtorch hoses and a placard that read, "'Tis always the season." 2 aisles, each a quarter of a mile long, were entirely devoted to camouflage clothing in every possible colour: desert brown, forest green, arctic grey, and hot pink, just in case your Spec Ops team needed to infiltrate a child's princess-themed birthday party. Directory signs hung over each lane: hockey heaven, grenade pins, sleeping bags, body bags, kerosene lamps, camping tents, large pointy sticks. At the far end of the store, perhaps half a day's hike away, a massive yellow banner screamed "Firearms!" I glanced at Grover, whose face looked even paler under the harsh fluorescence. "Should we start with the camping supplies?" I asked. The corners of his mouth drifted downward as he scanned a display of rainbow-coloured impaling spikes. Knowing Coach Hedge, he'll gravitate towards the guns. So we started our trek towards the distant promised land of firearms. I didn't like the store's too bright lighting. I didn't like the too cheerful canned music, or the too cold air conditioning that made the place feel like a morgue. The handful of employees ignored us. One young man was label gunning 50% off stickers on a row of Portapoo portable toilets. Another employee stood unmoving and blank-faced at the express register, as if he had achieved boredom-induced nirvana. Each worker wore a yellow vest with a macro logo on the back, a smiling Roman centurion making the OK sign. I didn't like that logo either. At the front of the store stood a raised booth with a supervisor's desk behind a plexiglass screen, like the warden's post in a prison. An ox of a man sat there, his bald head gleaming, veins bulging on his neck. His shirt and yellow vest could barely contain his bulky arm muscles. His bushy white eyebrows gave him a startled expression. As he watched us walk past, his grin made my skin crawl. "I don't think we should be here," I muttered to Grover. He eyed the supervisor. "Pretty sure there are no monsters here, or I'd smell them. That guy is human." This did not reassure me. Some of my least favourite people were human. Nevertheless, I followed Grover deeper into the store. As he predicted, Gleason Hedge was in the firearms section, whistling as he stuffed his shopping trolley with rifle scopes and barrel brushes. I saw why Grover called him Coach. Hedge wore bright blue double-weave polyester gym shorts that left his hairy goat legs exposed, a red baseball cap that perched between his small horns, a white polo shirt, and a whistle around his neck, as if he expected at any moment to be called in to referee a soccer game. He looked older than Grover, judging from his sun-weathered face, but it was hard to be sure with satyrs. They matured at roughly half the speed of humans. I knew Grover was 30-ish in people years, for instance, but only 16 in satyr terms. The coach could have been anywhere between 40 and 100 in human time. "Gleason," Grover called. The coach turned and grinned. His cart overflowed with quivers, crates of ammo, and plastic-sealed rows of grenades that promised fun for the whole family. "Hey, Underwood," he said. "Good timing. Help me pick some landmines." Grover flinched. "Landmines? Well, they're just empty casings," Gleason said, gesturing towards a row of metal canisters that looked like flasks. "But I figured we could fill them with explosives and make them active again. You like the World War II models or the Vietnam-era kind?" Grover grabbed me and shoved me forward. "Gleason, this is Apollo." Gleason frowned. "Apollo? Like Apollo? He scanned me from head to toe. "It's even worse than we thought. Kid, you gotta do more exercises." "Thanks," I sighed. "I've never heard that before." "I could whip you into shape," Hedge mused. "But first help me out. Stake mines? Claymores? What do you think?" "I thought you were buying camping supplies." Gleason arched his brow. "These are camping supplies. If I have to be outdoors with my wife and kid, holed up in that cistern, I'm going to feel a lot better knowing I'm armed to the teeth and surrounded by pressure-detonated explosives. I've got a family to protect." "But," I glanced at Grover, who shook his head as if to say, "Don't even try." At this point, dear reader, you may be wondering, Apollo, why would you object? Gleason Hedge has it right. Why mess around with swords and bows when you can fight monsters with landmines and machine guns? Alas, when one is fighting ancient forces, modern weapons are unreliable at best. The mechanisms of standard mortal-made guns and bombs tend to jam in supernatural situations. Explosions may or may not get the job done, and regular ammunition only serves to annoy most monsters. Some heroes do indeed use firearms, but their ammo must be crafted from magical metals, celestial bronze, imperial gold, Stygian iron, and so on. Unfortunately, these materials are rare. Magically crafted bullets are finicky. They can be used only once before disintegrating, whereas a sword made from magical metal will last for millennia. It's simply impractical to spray and pray when fighting a Gorgon or a Hydra. "I think you already have a great assortment of supplies," I said. "Besides, Melly is worried. You've been gone all day." "No, I haven't," Hedge protested. "Wait, what time is it?" "After dark," Grover said. Coach Hedge blinked. "Seriously? Ah, hockey pucks. I guess I spent too long in the grenade aisle. Well, fine, I suppose." "Excuse me," said a voice at my back. The subsequent high-pitched yelp may have come from Grover, or possibly me, who can be sure. I spun around to find that the huge bald man from the supervisor's booth had sneaked up behind us. This was quite a trick, since he was almost 7 feet tall and must have weighed close to 300 pounds. He was flanked by 2 employees, both staring impassively into space, holding label guns. The manager grinned, his bushy white eyebrows creeping heavenward, his teeth the many colours of tombstone marble. "I'm so sorry to interrupt," he said. "We don't get many celebrities, and I had to be sure. Are you Apollo? I mean, the Apollo?" He sounded delighted by the possibility. I looked at my satyr companions. Gleason nodded. Grover shook his head vigorously. "And if I were Apollo?" I asked the manager. "Oh, we'd comp your purchases," the manager cried. "We'd roll out the red carpet." That was a dirty trick. I'd always been a sucker for the red carpet. "Well then, yes," I said. "I'm Apollo." The manager squealed, a sound not unlike the Erymanthian boar made that time I shot him in the hindquarters. "I knew it. I'm such a fan. My name is Macro. Welcome to my store." He glanced at his 2 employees. "Bring out the red carpet so we can roll Apollo up in it, will you? But first, let's make the satyr's deaths quick and painless. This is such an honour." The employees raised their labelling guns, ready to mark us down as clearance items. "Wait," I cried. The employees hesitated. Up close I could see how much they looked alike. The same greasy mops of dark hair, the same glazed eyes, the same rigid postures. They might have been twins, or a horrible thought seeped into my brain, products of the same assembly line. "I am, I said, poetic to the last. "What if I'm not really Apollo?" Macro's grin lost some of its wattage. "Well, then I'd have to kill you for disappointing me." "Okay, I'm Apollo," I said. "But you can't just kill your customers. That's no way to run an army surplus store." Behind me, Grover wrestled with Coach Hedge, who was desperately trying to claw open a family fun pack of grenades, while cursing the tamper-proof packaging. Macro clasped his meaty hands. "I know it's terribly rude. I do apologise, Lord Apollo." "So, you won't kill us?" "Well, as I said, I won't kill you. The Emperor has plans for you. He needs you alive." "Plans," I said. I hated plans. They reminded me of annoying things like Zeus's once-a-century goal-setting meetings, or dangerously complicated attacks, or Athena. But my friends," I stammered. "You can't kill the satyrs. A god of my stature can't be rolled up in a red carpet without my retinue." Macro regarded the satyrs, who were still fighting over the plastic-wrapped grenades. Said the manager. "I'm sorry, Lord Apollo, but, you see, this may be my only chance to get back into the Emperor's good graces. I'm fairly sure he won't want the satyrs." "You mean you're out of the Emperor's good graces?" Macro heaved a sigh. He began rolling up his sleeves as if he expected some hard, dreary satyr murdering ahead. "I'm afraid so. I certainly didn't ask to be exiled to Palm Springs. Alas, the Princeps is very particular about his security forces. My troops malfunctioned 1 too many times, and he shipped us out here. He replaced us with that horrible assortment of Strixes and mercenaries and big ears. Can you believe it?" I could neither believe it nor understand it. Big ears. I examined the 2 employees, still frozen in place, label guns ready, eyes unfocused, faces expressionless. "Your employees are automatons," I realised. "These are the Emperor's former troops." "Alas, yes," Macro said. "They are fully capable, though. Once I deliver you, the Emperor will surely see that and forgive me." His sleeves were above his elbows now, revealing old white scars, as if his forearms had been clawed by a desperate victim many years ago. I remembered my dream of the Imperial Palace, the praetor kneeling before his new Emperor. Too late, I remembered the name of that praetor. Navius Sutorius Macro. Macro beamed at his robotic employees. "I can't believe Apollo remembers me. This is such an honour." His robotic employees remained unimpressed. "You killed Emperor Tiberius," I said, "smothered him with a pillow." Macro looked abashed. "Well, he was 90% dead already. I simply helped matters along." "And you did it for—" An ice-cold burrito of dread sank into my stomach. "The next emperor, Neos Helios." "It is him." Macro nodded eagerly. "That's right. The one, the only, Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus." He spread his arms as if waiting for applause. The satyrs stopped fighting. Hedge continued chewing on the grenade pack, though even his satyr teeth were having trouble with the thick plastic. Grover backed away, putting the trolley between himself and the store employees. "Gaius who?" He glanced up at me. "Apollo, what does that mean?" I gulped. "It means we run. Now."